It has been a hot minute since I've done a sit down video, and my god, I am just so happy and so relaxed to be doing one. So I'm gonna just get straight into it because I have a feeling this video is going to be very long. Today's video is sort of a wrap up of everything I've been reading lately. It's not a monthly wrap up just because I've been reading very sporadically, and it's also what I've read while I was in Europe. By the time you're watching this, hopefully the Europe vlogs are done, which I'm so relieved that they are done and edited because I've sort of been doing them, like I planned to do them while I was traveling, but then I wanted to enjoy my travels, so I didn't really get a chance to edit while I was traveling. And so it's backlogged quite a bit. So I've been back in Europe for about essentially 2 months now. And I've just finished editing those vlogs. So I'm very excited to get back to my usual content. I'm excited to do more content for you. So I'm just gonna get straight into what I've been reading lately. Sorry, I need a tea break. There is nothing better than a cup of tea, and I'm telling you this as someone who religiously drinks coffee. There's nothing better than a cup of tea. Nothing better than a cup of tea. Personally, tea, sorry, off tangent, tea, coffee, everything else. So the first book I'm going to talk about is actually a series, 2 series, set in the same world. You can probably guess it is the Caravel Trilogy by Stephanie Garber, and also Once Upon a Broken Heart series by Stephanie Garber. I read pretty much the entire series minus the last book while I was away, and I really loved it. I'm surprised I actually got through it because it is a YA series, and I've sort of fallen out of, I feel like I've talked about this before, but I feel like I've fallen out of love with YA. It takes a very rare book that makes me enjoy it. I think it's more to do with why I don't like YA. I just feel like I have grown out of it, and it has to be a really, really good story for me to enjoy it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I was very surprised, pleasantly surprised that I liked Caravel so much, and I was glad that I did like it so much because I was scared I wasn't gonna like it, and I know it's so well loved. It was more so the reason I wanted to read Caravel was so I could read the other Once Upon a Broken Heart, so I was very happy and relieved that I like Caravel. So the Caravel trilogy centers around 2 sisters who live in, I'm going to say, an abusive household set in like this 1800s time period. That's what I'm getting at. And every year there's sort of this competition slash circus-esque that comes to the capital city, and a competition is held within there. And for the longest time, Scarlett, the main character, has always wanted to attend and participate, and this year she does, sort of against her own will. Her sister basically forces her into it, and the story is really interesting, and it's not what I thought it was. I was expecting Night Circus vibes, and I did not get Night Circus vibes. I got something completely different, and I'm happy about it. I'm really bad at like synopsises and like summing up the stories. Also, I read this a long time ago, so I can't really remember what happened, but I remember I really liked the main character Scarlett right off the bat. I still am iffy about the sister, especially after like events of the last 2 books. Yeah, I'm still iffy about her. And then some of the characters from, sorry, there's a fly, the main villains from the Caravel series centers around Once Upon a Broken Heart, and that's all I'm gonna say. I don't know if I'm gonna talk about Once a Broken Heart in this video, but I definitely liked it a lot more than Caravel, and I really loved the main character from Once Upon a Broken Heart a lot more. And I felt like my biggest problem with Caravel was that, to me, the most interesting characters was Julian and Scarlett, and to be honest, their story kind of fell flat because it was so focused on other aspects of the story. But for me personally, Scarlett and Julian were the most interesting ones, and I felt like I didn't really get to see their potential within the trilogy trilogy. And I also think that is a theme with Stephanie Garber's writing, is that I feel like she doesn't focus, she introduces so many plot lines and so many characters that she can't fulfill what she's put down, if that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm so sorry. I will say it is a great series. I don't know why I liked it, because I did mention a lot of negative things before, but I still just I just enjoyed it. It was a fun, at the end of the day, YA books are considerably a lot more low stakes than adult books, so you're sort of guaranteed, I don't want to say that, you're sort of guaranteed a happy ending, and it's, to me, YA books have become like cozy vibes because they just feel like what I used, nostalgic. A good YA series will always be good in my eyes, and I'll always have a soft spot for him. The next book I read after Caravel, not really because I've read the series sort of one after each other, is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I believe that's what her name is. I knew this book existed, and I'm a huge fan of the Studio Ghibli movie. Honestly, it's probably my favorite movie. I go back to watch it probably once every 2 weeks. So I was really excited to read the book, and the book delivered, not gonna lie. I found out it's a series, which I'm really excited to continue. In ways, it was just like the movie, but it was also just so different. If you want a cozy read, this is the book for you. For those who don't know, for those who haven't watched the movie or have read the book, Howl's Moving Castle centers around a young woman named Sophie who lives a very uneventful life. She becomes cursed by the Witch of the Waste. The curse is basically she gets turned into an old woman, and she ends up living in Howl's Moving Castle, and the story progresses from there. Like I said before, it is such cute and cozy vibes, and I sort of did love the changes that sorry, that doesn't make sense. I was gonna say I liked the changes that the book made, but the book was published before it, but I liked how Markle in this is actually named Michael, and he's a teenager. I just found that part so much more funny in a way, because it does make more sense to me that he'd be a teenager than just this little random boy just living in Howl's Castle. But I digress. I really enjoyed this book. I am excited to read the other books in the series, just because the movie obviously didn't really cover the ongoing plotline, but I'm really excited. The next book I read is quite a part of quite a popular literary fiction series, and it's called Before the Coffee Gets Cold. I, again, really love this book. For those who don't know, Before the Coffee Gets Cold is a series about this cafe where a specific table in this cafe allows people to travel back in time to a certain moment, and that moment is when they last visited, or a time they visited that very cafe. It's sort of set in these little short stories, like I think there's 4 in each book, and they're all a short story about someone traveling back in time. The book being made up of these short stories made it to be a really like digestible read. My favorite, there's a bunch of different stories in it, but one of my favorites was the husband and wife. It truly devastated me. I don't want to get in too much into it, but that story devastates me, and I'm scared to read the second book in case it comes back into fruition. This was actually a reread for me, but because I wanted to read the second book, and I still haven't done it, so I'm probably gonna have to reread again, which is devastating to me. I'm hoping within the next books we're getting to know more about the characters who actually work in the cafe, and I hope we get to revisit some characters that we've met in the short stories. Definitely a good book if you want a short read. I will say, this sounds so weird, but I do this thing where whenever I go to the beach or on a holiday, I don't know why, but I always read sad books. So what I consider a beach read is very different to what other people consider a beach read. So for me, perfect beach read. While on holiday, I got really into reading Natalia Ginzburg's books. For those who like Eleanor Ferrante, I feel like Natalia Ginzburg is also another good option. The first book I read by her is called The Dry Heart. This is her books are really, really short. So The Dry Heart follows basically this woman who married an older man and she kills him, and it's sort of the lead up to the events of her killing him. I literally read this book in one sitting. It was just so short. You can definitely read it in one sitting. I really enjoyed Natalia Ginzburg's writing style, but to me, her main characters, they sort of fall flat. I've only read Valentino and The Dry Heart. I haven't read her 2 other books, but to me, they just lack a bit of heart, which is okay. And also this book dealt with obviously dealt with an unhappy marriage, and there was a child involved. Obviously they had a baby, and I didn't like that the baby didn't have a name, but I get why the choice was made, but I also just feel like it just makes you feel to me when, and I'm guessing that's the point that the author was trying to make, but you get really detached from characters when you don't know their names, and I didn't know anyone's names. I knew, who else? Oh, there was one character called Alberto, and he was literally like a wet rag. Yeah, the husband. I was just confused as to why she loved him so much. But yeah, kind of glad the husband's dead. Duh, as always. Yeah, this book was good. I definitely liked this book more than the next book I'm going to talk about by Ginzburg. Yeah, I just don't know how I feel about it, but I like, this sounds weird, I'm only reading it because I like the way she writes. It's just I just like it, but I don't actually like the stories she's writing about, if that makes sense. But it's similar to my relationship with V.E. Schwab. But the opposite, like I hate the way V.E. Schwab writes, but I love her stories. So it's like the opposite for that. The next book I read by Natalia Ginzburg is Valentino, and it centers around, it's from the perspective of the older sister of Valentino, and she sort of watches her younger brother get everything he wants, and he's sort of like this really spoiled child. He's got a new girlfriend pretty much every week. He's often getting engaged to these women and then ending the engagements. Like, he's just a bit of a player, doesn't really have any goals in life. He's sort of just assuming his parents are going to provide for them forever. And one day he comes home with his new fiancée, and she's a significantly older, richer, she's described as being very ugly woman, and her family are like shaken up by this. They're considering disowning him because they were like, why are you marrying? They think he's just obviously just using this lady for money, and this lady is manipulating him. And he sort of it just doesn't seem like that. Like, it's very obvious he is marrying her for money, but they does seem to be a bit of affection there. And you're sort of watching this marriage play out through the eyes of Valentino's sister. There is not a very happy ending to this book. I'm not going to get into it, but I still got no answers on why. Like, Valentino didn't specifically say why he married her, and yeah, so you didn't really get answers on that. But also I felt really bad for the main character because her life, things didn't really end up well for her, but you'd think because she was obviously the better sibling, she was a more caring, loving sibling, you'd hope she'd sort of get a bit of a payoff in the end, but she did not. Again, this was a very short book, perfect for a beach read. I kind of wish we got Valentino's point of view instead of the sisters. I just would have found that to be a bit more interesting than the point of view that we got. But nonetheless, it's still her books are still amazingly written. It's just sometimes, I don't know, I haven't read all of her books, so I can't really judge yet. It's just sometimes I just feel like I actually think they need to be longer, just so you can get a feel for the characters. The next book I read, I can't really talk too much about because it's the second book in a series, but I've read the second Crescent City book. It was actually a reread, A House of Sky and Breath. I reread it just because I was bored with what I was reading and I just wanted a bit of a pick-me-up. And I really like the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. So it was nice to revisit it. I still can't get over the ending, but also rereading it has sort of pointed out a lot of things where I was like, how did I not know that the ending was going to end the way that it did? Because it was so obvious throughout the foreshadowing, which I guess Sarah J. Maas is very good at foreshadowing. But I really like this book. Once again, I'll say this once and I'll say this again, I really love Ethan's point of views, and I hope we get more in the next book. I'm very excited. I can't believe we're getting the next book in January. I'm so excited. The next book I read was one I'm very, very excited to talk about, and that is One Dark Window by Rachel Gillig. Or Spillig? I can't remember her last name, that is so bad. But I really, really loved One Dark Window. I can't pronounce the main character's name for the life of me. Elspeth? I've never said it out loud, but I think it's Elspeth. Elspeth? 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 Oh no. One Dark Window is sort of described as a gothic fantasy, which I do see, but I don't think it fits into the gothic, what I think the gothic genre is. But it is still a fantastic, dark fantasy read. If you like books like Uprooted, The Bear and the Nightingale, A Far Wilder Magic, I think Juniper and Thorn, Wolf and the Woodsman, those sorts of books, I think you would really enjoy One Dark Window. So the story follows Elspeth Spindle. So the main character, I'm not going to say her name anymore, she gets this illness as a child, and sort of this illness grants her magical abilities, but she's actually healed by it, interestingly. But those who get overcome with this illness are actually sentenced to death, unfortunately. So the family she lives with sort of keeps it a secret that she has this illness, but as far as she knows, she doesn't have magical powers, and as far as her family knows, she doesn't have any magical powers. So it was just a fluke that she survived without getting magical powers. But she actually has this, it's called the nightmare, and it's basically this little monster that lives, I don't know if he's little, but he lives inside her brain, and he sort of comes up, and you can tell he's inside her because her eyes flash yellow. And the story, without giving too much away, is basically her trying to keep this secret hidden, that she has this magical ancient being trapped inside her mind. I thought this book was such an interesting concept, and I really, really enjoyed it. I thought there was a lot of intricate, as you can probably know from the blurb, like very intricate world building, yet there was sort of a simplicity in the writing that sort of just sweeps you up in it, and it doesn't, which I like, it doesn't leave much for guessing, like especially with, you know, sometimes you read fantasy books and you just sort of feel like you're getting a lot of information thrown at you. I think the writing style allowed for you to sort of just go along and only get information as needed. I really loved the main character. I'm excited to read the second book. I have it downloaded on my Kindle. I'm really curious to see how the story plays out, and I hope we get more from the side characters, because I actually really enjoyed a few of the side characters, so I am looking forward to seeing how their storylines play out as well. But this was probably a very good read, definitely high up there in one of my favorite reads this year. The next book I DNF'd, and it was My Killer Vacation by Tessa Bailey. I couldn't really give you much about the plot, but from what I remember, this girl, she's living in like an Airbnb for a holiday with her brother, and she finds a dead body, and then this is where the book left off. She found the dead body, and then she called the police, and then the police came, and a private investigator came, and the investigator and her are probably going to get in a relationship. But I DNF'd it, so I don't actually know. I don't really like Tessa Bailey. This is like the second book of Tessa Bailey that I've tried to read. I don't really like her writing style, but I totally get why people do like it. It's just not for me personally. The next book that I read was honestly probably one of my favorite romance books that I ever read, and that was The Right Move. I think it's the second book in a series, but I've only read the second book. Obviously I haven't read the first one, but it's essentially a short romance, best friend's brother situation. Honestly, cutest love story I've ever read. This is the first romance book I've read without there being any red flags for the main male love interest, and I loved it. Like, he was completely non-toxic, and I just loved it. Wholesome vibes all around. I kind of do wish I've read the first book first, just so I could have seen the characters, the two main characters, before the book, because I know I wish I would have seen their first meeting. It's talked about in the second book, but I would have liked to have seen the two main characters first meeting for the first time. But yeah, I loved all the characters. I might have to go back and read the first book, because I know the third book has come out. But yeah, I just really liked it. I thought it was really cute. It's a basketball romance, which I don't really care for sport romances, but this one I really do recommend it. It was just a cute story, like genuinely wholesome vibes. That guy did not, like, Ryan Shea did not have a single red flag, and I just think that is beautiful. The next two books I've read are a part of a series. I have read the first book. Actually, let me just get the name. Things We Never Got Over by Lucy Score. That is the first book, but I read that last year and it was one of my favorite books I read last year. But we're not going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about the next two books, and that is Things We Hide from the Light and The Things We Left Behind. Again, this series is set in a small town romances. Pretty much all of the books are Grumpy and Sunshine trope, which is a personal fave of mine. But the second book follows the brother of the main love interest in Things We Never Got Over, and it deals a lot with PTSD, which I was sort of expecting, but I didn't think it would go that much into it. I did really enjoy that aspect of the book because it did add another layer to Nash, who is the main character, which I didn't really get in the first book. I liked how it was a bit of a healing journey for both of the main characters, but to be honest, the only reason I read this second book was so I could read the last book, which is about Suit Daddy Lucian. Lucian? Anyway, he was the star of the series. He will always be the star of the series. I love that man. Love how toxic he is. I love how I was just talking about how I loved that the main character, Ryan Shea from The Right Move, had no red flags, but here I'm talking about Lucian, who has all the red flags. This book, the last book, Things We Left Behind, had such great build-up because you could see the characters, like, their tension from the very first book, from all of their interactions. This book was not only was it Grumpy and Sunshine, but it was enemies to lovers, which, it was great. I loved it. I thought it was good. I still actually think I liked the first book more. I liked the plot of the first book more, but I loved the characters. If I could just put the characters that are in Things We Left Behind into Things We Never Got Over, I think I'd like it a lot more. But I did still like Things We Left Behind because I just love the characters so much. But read this series. Please read this series. I love it. This is like the only Lucy Score books I really like, to be honest. I love this series. Again, I said it before. I know I said The Right Move was my favorite romance book, but this is my favorite romance series. Okay? I often say things are my favorite when they're actually not. The next book I wanted to talk about was a very anticipated read, and that was Swordcatcher by Cassandra Clare. I have been on the Cassandra Clare train for way too long, and I want to get off. To be honest, I really do want to get off, but she keeps pulling me back in, and that's what happened to me when I read Swordcatcher. Somebody set me free from Cassandra Clare. I want to be set free. I really do, but I can't. Swordcatcher follows this main character called Kel, who is essentially the body double of a prince, and he sort of becomes best friends with the prince. Low-key, I get Parabatai vibes. She really there are a lot of like little things from Shadowhunters that I see in Swordcatcher. I'm pretty sure there was a line where the prince goes, "Kel, is that you? Is that not Parabatai? Is that not Parabatai? I think it is." Where was I even going with this? Yeah, so the book centers around Kel, whose sort of job is to protect the prince and sort of act as the prince when the prince is in danger. Deliriousness. I'm delirious. And that's the general gist. There's a lot of assassination attempts. I don't want to give away too much because I do think this is going to be a really good fantasy series. I was completely immersed into the story by the prologue. I think Cassandra Clare has like an amazing gift of immediately sweeping someone into the story. There was such interesting, I say this all the time, I love world building. Cassandra Clare is the queen of world building. So much fun magic, and there's so much political intrigue. The political system honestly is what made me keep reading this book, other than the characters. But it was just such an interesting political system, what was going down. And also there's sort of a criminal organizations in the background as well as the monarchy, which I found really, really interesting, and I can't wait to see how it progresses. I found, like any Cassandra Clare book, it is full of unique and diverse characters that come from sort of all different backgrounds, and I think it makes for a very realistic storylines. This book is genuinely filled with anti-heroes and characters that live in the grey, and honestly I just loved it. It was just such a fun little ride, and it was such a huge step away from the Shadowhunter books, but you still sort of saw glimpses and nods to them throughout. This makes me really excited to see what else Cassandra Clare has in her mind. And apparently this book got a lot of criticism at the beginning for being similar to, what's it called, A Darker Shade of Magic. I've only read the first book in A Darker Shade of Magic, but other than the two characters being named Kel and being friends with a prince, I don't really get the vibe that it was similar. But then people also said Nocturna is very similar to called Darker Shade of Magic, but I genuinely can't see the similarities in that either. So if someone would kindly explain those similarities for me, I would appreciate it, because I don't really know, because also it's been 5 years since I've read A Darker Shade of Magic, and I didn't really like the book, to be honest, so ugh. But I give Swordcatcher 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. The next book, and the last book I'm going to talk about, I genuinely have saved the best to last, is my Roman Empire book, and that is Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. I fucking loved this book. This book is my Roman Empire. I have not, since I've read this book about 2 weeks ago, I have not stopped thinking about it. I'm obsessed. For those who don't know, those who live under a rock and don't know what Divine Rivals is about, it is centered around this girl called Iris and this boy called Roman. They sort of live in this world very similar to our own, in this, I'm going to say like a World War I, World War II era, but it's set in a different world, so it's not World War I and World War II, but it's that sort of 1930s vibe, and it's set in this war between two different gods, and these two main characters are actually war correspondents, so they are reporting on the war. And that is all I'm going to say about the plot, but I love this setting so much more than I thought I would, and I just thought it was very refreshing for a fantasy book to be set in something that's not necessarily like an urban fantasy, but a bit more modern, but still has a bit of a historical aspect to it. I thought it was really, really interesting, and I'm really curious to how the god, because we don't get it answered really in the book, but I'm really curious to how the gods work, and I'm so excited for the next book. The book left, without giving too much away, the book was left on a very mean and selfish cliffhanger. Very mean. And I thought it was a standalone. I thought Divine Rivals was a standalone, and to be met with that cliffhanger, I was devastated. I still am devastated, but I need the next book. I need the next book. This is like, Divine Rivals has no fans, I'm dead. If Divine Rivals has no fans, I'm dead. And that is a pill to swallow. I can breathe. I'm going to end this video here. I hope you enjoyed. I apologize once again for my rambling, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know if you have read any of these books. I would love to know your opinions. The next video, I have no idea what the next video is going to be. I have no idea, but I'll think of something, so don't you worry about that. But like and subscribe if you haven't already. I'll appreciate it so, so much. Hope you all have an amazing week. Goodbye.